Today's speakers for this first panel were the unfortunate consequence of failed cloning. One of them came out British, which was especially disappointing.
Ooh, shots fired.
It's okay, they're not part of Europe anymore. As they were being sent to the furnace to be disposed of as medical waste, they managed to escape by making a significant Rube Goldberg machine out of Cat5 cables. And ever since then, they've been wandering from city to city, performing mediocre rock shows and bank heists. And while we do have the cops standing outside, we'd first like to welcome them to the stage. They are Chris Barker, Adrien Thebo, and Ben Hughes.
So this is our talk, titled Everything is Terrible. 3 perspectives on building, configuring, and securing software. An inspirational and aspirational talk. So first, some introductions.
We're doing them
Thank you.
again. Doing them properly.
Yes. I'm Chris Barker, otherwise known as Mr. Zarkwan. I tend to give people a lot of suggestions. Sometimes they follow them. I've been doing operations for a while, and then about 4 years ago, I decided to go to Puppet.
Adrien Thebo. I started in Puppet like 5 or something years ago. At some point, I decided that I wanted to cause people mild retina damage when they look at me, so there's that. Currently a developer and very angry about security.
What have I done? I'm Ben Hughes. I used to work at Puppet, and I'm not convinced I don't still. I'm now at Etsy, which is relatively obvious, and I work in security, so I consume a lot of gin.
So we kind of wanted to talk about how the world was before DevOps came about for all 3 of our roles, as being in operations, development, and security. On the operations side, I'm sitting there kind of waiting for somebody to hand me a tarball, maybe, or just a bunch of files to deploy on a server, while I'm in the middle of doing all my other work of trying to actually spin all the plates, keep things from working, or not working in some cases.
And so I'd be in the role of the developer, given any number of requirements, some of which may be physically impossible, varying deadlines, scope change, and I'm just trying to ship the software. I just want to ship the software as quickly as I can, so get my builds out, and hopefully it'll pass QA, and then throw it over the wall. Maybe it'll be like in Google Drive. Like, that's a good deployment mechanism, right? So Google Drive.
In a Google document. Yeah. A tarball in a Google document.
Challenge accepted.
And after I'd get that, I'd get it up and running, hopefully, along with trying to get all the other things working as well. And then maybe a couple weeks later, I'd tell Ben, or he would find out.
And then I'd, what's the polite way of phrasing this? Panic slightly, lose my decorum, and go like, why is this on the public internet? Why are there all these ports open? What idiot wrote this code? I'm just going to turn this off because I like saying no to people and I'm quite mean.
So after this, it goes back to maybe a 3-month cycle from the time that Adrien actually built the software to somebody actually says we can actually put customers in front of it. What this really leads to is one continuous tire fire. But now, Adrien and I have gone to DevOpsDays. We maybe use some configuration management tools, and we're in this really awesome agile DevOps world, right?
Yeah, we're sitting around the campfire singing Kumbaya. We are having very quick iterations. I'm deploying 4 times a day. I am shipping all sorts of random new code all the time, and I'm delighted because I can put something in production right away. It's great.
And from my standpoint, I'm able to build servers really quickly. I've probably moved a lot of my workflow over to AWS for dev and test. I'm able to deploy these things called security groups, which are kind of like firewall rules. I don't really know how they work, but they kind of have set up the way that I want.
They're firewall rules written in JSON. It's all they are.
That makes so much more sense now. And we're still very happy, but for some reason, there's still some kind of friction going on.
So what I see is my orange-haired friend is able to pick any library he finds on GitHub or SourceForge and just throw that in the code today or even over lunch, whereas before I had 3 months to try and find all the bugs. Now I have 3 minutes. So there's just even more random libraries going up. There's even more random servers going up. No one can configure firewalls in JSON, as of course the natural language of firewalls is XML. Because that wouldn't go wrong. So we've moved from a world where I had 3 months to panic, and am I allowed to swear? Is that allowed? Organizer. Can I swear?
I thought I was the insult. Do not do gendered slurs.
All right. I lose my shit. Thank you, organizer. Because there's now like way more stuff on fire than before, whereas there's only slow burning things. There's now the slow burning things from before and the tiny miniature artisanal tire fires in AWS.
So what really becomes the problem here is that there's actually just this whole different misalignment, right? Like even on the DevOps side, we're still trying to get to this point of people collaborating together and working on things. But what does that really mean when an organization maybe hasn't embraced this change throughout the whole structure?
So from a development perspective, like my responsibility is to take product specifications and ship them. And I'm trying to figure out ways where I can build new ship new code, ship things rapidly, take the things that I was given and make them reality. And I want to be able to create or build new functionality without necessarily having to reinvent the wheel. So if I have to do image processing, it'd be convenient for me to use Image Magic or something like that. Because I don't want to
do.
Oh. And this is how I do the bank heists. Yeah, so building new software and minimizing just the reinvention of wheels and trying to work quickly, effectively. And this creates a whole lot of fire.
I'm also not convinced no developer wants to reinvent the wheel, because every developer thinks they can invent a better wheel.
I don't think, I know.
I love you developers, really.
So as somebody who's working in operations,
that's the magic of DevOps right there.
That's for the end of the talk.
More hugs are better.
So from the operations standpoint, my priorities are really trying to keep the plates that I have spinning, the backlog of work minimized. I'm sitting there working on trying to triage all of the existing projects. Some of the work that a development team may have done has gone off to another project. So now I'm the one who's actually in charge of the care and feeding of a project. Probably a bunch of Red Hat 4 or 5 servers sitting around as well. Some of those are Enterprise Linux Red Hat. Other ones are just Red Hat. And maybe NT4.
Still newer than CentOS.
Yes. And so really, from my standpoint, I'd like for things to stop burning. I'll take stability over any new features that can come into the environment. And I'm really trying to keep my 3 a.m. pagers down. And honestly, in areas, I'm making decisions that are based on how to minimize getting woken up at 4 in the morning. So I'm also doing things that is causing Ben's problems. Like, I turn off firewalls because, damn it, I need to just make this thing work, and nobody told me what ports the service is actually communicating on. So I'm just going to open up everything until things actually start working and the app starts running again, so I can close the ticket. And so, I'd like to be able to work on my backlog, but it's getting longer and longer and longer. But most of the time, that means I just can kind of stand around and watch stuff. But it's in a perimeter, right? Myself and my colleagues, if I'm lucky, are able to sit there and kind of keep things cordoned off.
Security has, of course, a different set of wants, which are the most important. Because if there's one thing security has, its ego is to go. You can advance, because I don't have the clicker. We want things not to change so that we can try and get a decent grasp of what's out there and find as many bugs as possible. So things really not changing ever. Because that just brings in unknowns and bad things you want. Except on those patches, which must happen this instant, and you must drop everything you're doing because there's nothing more important than me and my work. Which is why I don't know what ops are doing all the time, but they should be patching my stuff. It's ridiculous. You're ridiculous. Go rob a bank.
It's wonderful. That's great. I'm the one who didn't get to dye his hair.
That's after.
I thought you were blonde.
No. So how do we kind of start resolving these things? Some of it is really just getting us to work together. The fact that there's 3 of us up here right now talking about the problems that we have, in part with each other, but also with our jobs, and our priorities helps us trying to get in alignment so we actually know what's going on. Also, so we actually can understand and empathize with each other on here. The next thing that you can start doing around this is integrating some training, some things across the teams around this. But really, you also have to do things such as address some of the structural issues that you might have in an organization. So ensuring there's interaction points so that devs can actually talk to security people, and that operations and security people talk to each other more than just over angry emails and ticket wars.
What can't Jira fix?
Nothing. Actually, wait, no, Jira did give me an email alias really quickly yesterday. So that was a human, but it went through Jira.
I'm pleased.
Yeah.
And I still maintain that for a lot of my career, this conversation is more than I've had with dev teams and operations teams while being in security. So that would have been useful 15 years ago. So well done us for sitting on this for 15 years. So traditionally operations people like sitting in their cave, developers like, I don't know, sitting in their jacuzzi writing mad code, and security people, let's not talk about them, but they generally don't play well with others. And I think all that needs to change in the way that certainly DevOps have tried to bring operations closer to devs. I don't know if it's brought devs closer to ops, but whatever.
And in a lot of cases, you have the security team coming in after the fact, after the code is live, after things are already burning. But these are issues of, hey, maybe I need to do some image processing, I need a library. Instead of waiting for the, oh, this library is horribly vulnerable and like we've never seen so many rootkits on one server, we talk to security up front and say, hey, we would like to do X, Y, or Z. What's your advice on this? What libraries are safe? What things should we know up front? Because this guy has a wealth of knowledge, and like the security teams, they have so much info. Maybe we're just screwed. No, they do have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and this is something that if you tap into earlier, you can get you can do things right from the beginning just by talking to people. And this is just easy to forget, but it turns out that the simple things.
Don't use image magic.
So there's the area on this, right? So we keep talking about structure, and some of this is also going to the cultural points too, such as, always assume that people aren't trying to screw you over unless they're Ben. But really, truly, actually trying to build a space kind of security as a safe space. So people can come to you and say, hey, I clicked on this email, there's a problem with that, or hey, I want to build this thing out, or help me figure out how to write better JSON firewall rules so that it doesn't actually suck.
I blame Amazon for everything.
And part of this is also why we have these ideas of doing rotations, right? Is that if you can work together and collaborate together, then people actually have a better understanding of how things are going.
And so for developers, once again, consulting security for best practices, but just going out, getting training, attending DEF CON, for instance, or going to an all-WASP training or anything like that, because there's a lot of things that you may not think about, like timing attacks, which it's like, oh, I'll just do a for loop. Oh, I can optimize this, make this faster. That's bad. So learning what you actually need to address instead of like trying to bolt on security afterwards. I think we're talking about tooling later.
Also go to B-Sides Portland because they're a media sponsor and they're lovely people.
And then, so some more specifics around this that we actually would really want to call out is the idea of coordinated planning. So at Puppet, one of the things that we've started doing is whenever we build a new product or feature, actually Beth here is the one who introduced the idea of holding, so we can single her out. She's the person who's laughing loudly usually when we're making fun of each other. Is the idea of a mini convention. So we actually have a 3-day internal con that has subject matter experts across the field, including folks in operations, people who are handling some of the security aspects, and the development team, so that everyone actually has a baseline at the start of the project of who the people involved are, but also as the project goes on, there's more interaction with that. So then all of a sudden, if I'm getting a ticket from Adrien about something, I actually remember back to 3 months ago, the actual conversation we had, and it's actually this empathy. We actually had time to sit down and work with it. So I know what the hell he needs these library services for in the first place, or I know what database is in place, and security knows ahead of time that yes, we're going to be doing testing in AWS, but we're going to be using maybe this pre-built or verified firewall process ahead of time, or just tell them that it's actually going to be running in AWS in this availability zone, so that's not somebody's leaking their GitHub keys.
And it's hard to understate the importance of empathy. It's very easy for me to think, here's my responsibilities, I don't have to go any farther. The server's not my problem. Security, I don't care. But it is this lack of empathy that it's like, there's a ticket, 3 a.m., things are on fire, and it's like, finger pointing begins, and there's blame being thrown around, and the issue isn't being addressed. We're just creating hostile relationships, and it becomes harder to work together. But with this minicon idea, you sit down in the room and you have this shared goal. You are trying to achieve this thing, and you can see that everyone there is in good faith, and you actually are working on the same project together. So I know we're all like paranoid of like, oh, we can't have touchy-feely talks, but like the basic human interactions do really matter. And the difference between the, oh God, we had another vulnerability, and the, oh, we as a team may have made a mistake, let's fix this together. This can mean the difference between like hating your coworkers and having hugs on stage and such.
If you want to add anything about hate.
I have a record collection about hate, but yeah, security's traditionally been a very unfriendly and unwelcoming place, and I hope that's slowly changing, certainly as the industry matures, but it's very much been we say no, we block things, we turn things off, which even ignoring how much you hug someone is not always the best way to do business, and security does lose sight of these things are put in place to enable business. Most companies' job isn't to be the most secure company, it's to actually try and make money, because yay, capitalism. So just turning everything off and like covering all your servers in concrete and then burying them would be secure, but you would also be quite unemployed quite rapidly, unless you also had a sideline in making concrete. And who doesn't have one of those?
I guess I need one. Also on this, we mentioned rotations a lot. Specifically there's this presenter, you might have heard of her. Her name is Alice Goldfuss. She did this awesome talk called Rockstars, Builders, and Janitors. If you can catch it, is it online? Is it the video up?
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Sweet. And but really watch that as one of the ways to look at, if you need a quick intro on how you can possibly start doing rotations for people to start interacting with each other and going really from the standpoint of what are the things people don't want to do first, so that you can actually understand why the work that no one wants to do is the work that everyone should first figure out how to do. So you build empathy and realize, wow, I don't want to make more mistakes for other people to have to clean up.
Someone else will do that via libraries or kernel exploits, so you'll have to clean those up anyways to try and add fewer of those.
Yeah. And the other thing on here is what comes up a lot too when we start talking about security is people start talking about things like doing bug bounties, doing pen testing. If you're at the point where you're still trying to figure out how to have the conversation with a security person, you probably don't want to spend all the money on a bug bounty yet, because you're gonna fix that first. If I can actually work with Ben, we'll actually get rid of all of the low-hanging fruit, so we don't actually have to pay out, a full salaries to a bug bounty team, when we realize just working with Ben can find all those ahead of time.
When Etsy first launched their bug bounty program back in, I don't know, 4 years ago, the first 2 weeks were just spent triaging bugs and getting mostly the security team, but working with developers to get them all fixed. And that was everyone in the security team just doing bug bounty stuff. And we'd already had a security team for a number of years and had already had some audits at that point anyway. So there are bugs out there. So don't rush into bug bounties.
So as everyone talks about how DevOps Days isn't really about tooling, but then we have the slide where we talk about how, let's talk about some of the tooling that you might actually want to look at.
So one of the things that I've been working on with a few other people is embedding security testing right as part of the CI pipeline. So if you make a mistake, if you write code that doesn't do proper SSL verification or doesn't respect CRLs, your test's passed, your code doesn't get merged. And so this is really nice. It means that, isn't that slide hypnotizing? Like, it's been really rough when we've been preparing.
Just really hungry now.
Pancakes.
They're gluten-free.
Nothing's ever too soon for you, Ben. So yeah, doing this very aggressive, like, if your code is not secure, if it has issues, it does not get merged into the build. It means that you can work with at least a little bit more confidence, and you can use, and so for an example of this is no go to fail, where it just does some really rigorous SSL verification. Or tools, I'm not sure if Gauntlet's been mentioned much, but Gauntlet is kind of Cucumber syntax sort of driven penetration testing tool. So it'll hook into Nmap and maybe Metasploit and such like that. So you can say, okay, we have a live build on this server. Let's bring it down, or let's do everything we can. So, and you can hook this up to monitoring, where, I mean, you have security tests that cause Nagios alerts. So when you ship code to your staging server, you get an alert saying, hey, if this code would go live, then you would have new and exciting services running on your server. Like, having that continuous checking is quite powerful.
And also on that area is obviously infrastructure as code tools. I'm a little biased on Puppet is pretty good at this, but there's other ones here too. Chef is also here. At least it's a configuration management tool and not someone's shell script, which is what I used to have to spend most of my time fixing. And the reason for this is, how I see it is, my infrastructure as code, my actual code, my repo that I'm using to build servers is something I can work with a security team on. As one, the security can actually validate my server configurations and I can repeatedly deploy them, but also becomes a contract I can provide to my to my development team, so they can say, look, this is what you're going to get. I can actually pin specific libraries in place so that, you know, OpenSSL is pinned at a specific version. We know that this is it, so that, or in some cases, we can just ensure latest so that it just always has the latest version on it, and then reboot everything. But the idea is that I can actually have a easy programmatic way to instantiate my systems, which makes Ben's life a lot easier because he can actually inspect that code, possibly raise issues on it, rarely send a pull request, but at least know that there's a baseline in which I'm actually building my systems now.
So what we've actually done for some of our stuff is when there's been vulnerability announcements and CentOS eventually make a patch, recompile a patch from Red Hat, is putting that information in Chef into a fact. No, not a fact. I've got that wrong, haven't I? What does Chef use? Ohio thing? I don't know. My infrastructure brain is gone. And then we have Nagios. I did remember that. Alerting on that so that if any hosts are suddenly vulnerable to this, then someone will get notified, probably not paged, but emailed. And then as soon as new servers are integrated or spun up or whatever you do with servers, it will get these Nagios checks, probably. And then we can always have, like, is everything patched to at least this level? And that's all done for us automatically.
Yeah, and that's a similar thing we do on the operations side in other tools. Also, with the monitoring aspects, you can do some very creative things with your config management. Some of the things you can have set up is being able to deploy it. That really is still going. Wow. I should have had that pause. Actually, if you're using tools like Sensu, you can actually broadcast events to the Sensu system before or after your config management tool is running. So just being able to alert to Sensu that, hey, I'm going to run Puppet right now. So if a service restarts in this window when Puppet is running, you probably don't need to raise an error. But also, if Puppet has just finished running and a service stopped, that is a good way of indicating somebody just ate that service, and you probably need to alert whoever just triggered the Puppet run. And if you can tie that back to a code change or other system. Lastly, in terms of tools, this is much more of equipping yourself and your team on this. At Puppet, we do a DevOps survey. The folks out there can give you a copy of it. And it actually includes a section talking about security and how security as part of your DevOps process is a useful way, and it's research on this. So if you need to go back to the organization and get buy-in to help with these structural changes, these cultural changes, these are actually numbers and graphs and data to help prove the point, instead of just saying, hey, I just saw these three weirdos standing on a stage for 30 minutes talking about this stuff. There's actually some science to back this up. Specifically, organizations that have these sorts of policies literally have spend half the time that they otherwise would on security events and remediation. Is the biggest finding we found out of it from the survey this last year.
If the media of the last year hasn't convinced you that maybe security is a good thing, then I hope a survey will, because it's been a pretty rough year for security.
Well, there's the aspect too that security does not, having a very secure server does not inherently make you money. Having a vulnerable server will cause you to lose money, maybe at some point, but being able to say, here are the numbers, here's your risk factor, here's all the time you're losing, and this is how you can, once again, save money and be more efficient. You're putting a monetary cost onto something that was otherwise kind of like an unquantifiable good thing. So we always knew it was a good thing, we just may not have been able to justify it, but saying, hey, you want to save a whole lot of money here, or do you want to save face in front of the entire world and be more efficient? Hey, maybe we should do these smart things.
And actually, improving your security is starting to save you money due to the horrible world of cyber insurance, where if you actually have more security, you will pay less on your cyber insurance premiums. What a horrible word that is. But it's sadly now a very real thing.
Otherwise known as a gin budget. So
it's generally where a ridiculous number of insurance companies say you should allocate this much money to spend on Mandiant when you're broken into, and then you argue with them about why that's a ridiculous number, and then you hire more security people.
Yeah. So just to wrap this up, Ben's going to talk more about some of the cultural changes later at his next talk. We managed to wrangle him in for this one as well, so you get twice as much twitchy Ben today.
My chronic insomnia is really bad at the moment, so I've not really slept.
I've got a really good view of his bloodshot eyes from here. But it is worth emphasizing, we've already done this with DevOps. We've broken down that silo, but we're not done yet. We are very far from being done. So once again, start these conversations, be engaged with these people. Remember that we are all on this common goal together, and you can achieve a lot just by having those mini cons, bringing people into the fold sooner, making this a priority, and saves you money and you meet new people, and so all that great stuff.
So it's probably included in the conversations you had earlier about dev and security.
Eat the mic.
Sorry. About dev and security needing to be closer together. But one of the things that development tends to be unaware of is blast radius. Is if something goes wrong with this component, what does it mean all the way down the line? And this goes into major vendors. I just finished teaching a class with a major vendor that left open a container port. And suddenly I got a nastygram from a large cloud provider saying, why are you DDoSing my people? So is there a formal system right now for evaluating the effects of bugs in particular areas that you can communicate back and say, this is why security needs to be part of this reference architecture?
I'm sure a vendor will try and sell you something to do that. I think as systems get more complicated, it gets harder, because it used to be you compromise one system, you have that system and it's like network link and as much disk as it has. But now you compromise a machine, then you find their AWS creds. Now you have as much AWS as you can use until the accounting department start crying. Not that would ever happen. So I think it's a really hard thing to quantify. I think that sadly some of the best people who will quantify it are people trying to sell you insurance, because they have a very strong monetary interest in working out what that exposure is. But I think that's still very immature because it's so new and it's not really that explored. Yeah, good luck.
And some of this might actually be able to be derived from maybe staging and QA areas to actually get an idea of what's the scope of this. Like, if you're building and developing a service, it's going to only have 5 systems, but you're actually going to throw it behind a autoscale group that's going to go up to 250. It's really starting to keep those things in mind, and that's something I found can sometimes be a perspective that I've always had from working in the operations standpoint, because my view has always been I'm going to be responsible for n number of systems, and that becomes more complicated as things go on. Versus just having that development environment that you're focusing on, just try to get this work on 3 and then we'll scale it later. So I think the getting an idea of what is actually building the applications and what's in there, and having at least that communication going on, so that doing a formal assessment may be difficult, but it definitely is something that would be easier to surface once you're having these conversations.
If you have the money and it's on a particular thing, then just contract someone to do a red team engagement on it, and they will tell you how big the blast radius is, and then everything else they've broken into, and all of your PII that you didn't know was in another system, and go from there. But that doesn't scale, but if the specifics, it's terrifying and exciting.
Morning. I was just curious, in a DevOps world or model, if any of the responsibilities of security change. So, security team is still accountable for overall security, but do any of the responsibilities move to some of the, ops or developers?
They don't change because they always should have been. Everyone is responsible for security. I would say that security they're there to help, they are there to advise, they are here to say, hey, that's a really dumb thing you're doing, let's not put that into production. And at the end of the day, security is there to say, hey, we have found these holes, let's resolve these problems. But developers have to be security conscious, 100%. Like, we're all just at DEF CON, and oh man, the vulnerabilities we saw were fascinating because of programming flaws. And you can't put a timing vulnerability behind a firewall, or you can't hide a lot of things. So developers have to be security conscious, and operations, that's where things actually, that's where the rubber hits the road. That is where security, unless security starts standing up servers, which might be cool, these guys are responsible for where everything is run. And this is effectively the first line of defense. So the responsibility was always there, and so the answer you wanted to is yes, but we always should have been saying security is everybody's responsibility.
Did I get it wrong? You got most things ever said.
I talked quickly.
It's like the things that change for operations and devs in this wonderful DevOps thing also change in some ways for security, in that you're now not a wall to be thrown over. You actually have to have conversations rather than just mandate things, which leads to, I don't want to say leads to compromise, because there's too many double meanings on that, but that leads to a shared understanding. There we go. Thank you, Brain Thesaurus. Rather than just it's this, you must do this. You have to communicate more, which security people are not good at, as I'm proving by rambling over the same point.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts about, say you have a web app that uses HTTP proxy, and there was a big fire drill like 2 weeks ago when everybody had to go turn that off and sanitize. So what if that breaks your application in the process? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think I heard someone in the front row say, that sucks. If you're saying this is specifically with respect to a security fire drill, what was the phone thing that happened, like some bad software being shipped?
Cool, you learned something. Yeah. That's cool, you learned something. You found a new thing that you can make better. That's not, depending on your website, taking it down may or may not be a big deal. You don't work at Delta, do you? No. I asked for no reason. I just need some cheap flights. And some Bitcoin. I know, game days and security are definitely a thing. It's a thing we've been pushing in our organization, of what happens if we break this in this way, but as an attacker, not as an ops person. I don't know, doing whatever game daying ops people do.
Drinking over whiskey. The network cable.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's I don't know. At Etsy we like learning, so we turn it into a learning exercise and then hug for an hour. So, but it sounds a painful thing, but a thing you now know more about.
And the area of having a reactive to that is that usually a triage team or something would come together that would kind of compromise the literally representatives of all three areas of interest to work on that, to find the resolution going forward. But it really becomes, in some cases, that's something that may happen as a symptom of not having that communication happening. So it's really hard to be like, hey, so we found this problem, now let's immediately implement all of the DevOps and security integration to fix it. You can kind of do that where folks talk about, like, let's do a firefighting drill on that. But then you realize that you're just really good at fighting fires and you just wait until they happen. But in some ways you can use it to pilot internally. Let's not dissolve the team once we've actually fixed that. Let's have them keep going forward and keep iterating on that as they keep working.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you so much. Can I have a round of applause?
We will be having children for lunch.